The rain fell as I waited for him to show up, anxiously drumming my fingers on the countertop. I lit another cigarette, chain smoking, but sue me, I was under a lot of stress. I had spent weeks trying to ignore the sounds coming from my basement. I couldn't sleep from all the noise coming from down there. I couldn't focus on anything. More scratching came from behind the door, made me fumble the cigarette I was holding, the end of it falling onto the ground. Cursing, I relit it as I stopped onto the ember, out onto the linoleum. The exterminator was late. He was making me wonder if he was going to show up at all. Just as I was thinking this, a knock sounded from the door. I ran to it, peeking through the peephole to see a young man standing there. He wasn't what I was expecting. He didn't look like any exterminator I had ever seen before. He was well dressed, tall and thin, clean shaven with a slight smile on his face as he stood waiting. I pitched the door open, eager to get this over with. "Hello, ma'am. I believe you called me the other day." The voice was smooth and cheerful. "Yes, I was, referred by someone who swore by you," I replied, gesturing for him to come inside. He nodded, stepping into the entryway and surveying his surroundings. His smile faded slightly as he glanced toward the basement door. "I take it this is where the problem is?" he asked, striding over the door before I answered. "Yes, I can't even describe what it's like down there," I stammered. "No problem. I'll just go ahead and take a look," he chuckled, his good-natured face returning to a warm smile. I smiled back. "Can I get you anything first? Water, tea, coffee?" I inquired, starting toward the kitchen. "Well, maybe just some water, thank you." I shuffled over, grabbing a glass and turning toward the faucet. "What did you say your name was again?" "My name is Mark, ma'am. Glad to meet you." "Call me Hannah." I smiled at him again, handing him the glass. His hand brushed against mine as he took it from me, tipping it back and draining it quickly. He was growing on me quite a bit. I took the glass from him. He walked over the basement door, taking a small amulet from his breast pocket. I tried to get a good look at what it was. Would you mind if I come with you?" I blushed, hoping I didn't sound too eager. "Ma'am, this could get pretty messy." His cheerful tone was gone, now replaced by a calm determination. "I'm just curious. I wanted to know how you do it all." He pulled open the door and held it, waiting for me to catch up. We descended the steps slowly. I could see him looking at every corner before taking each step. "Ah, I see you've been using salt. A lot of people seem to think this will help," he murmured. He walked towards the walls, placing his hands against them, a recoil like he had been burned. I tried not to flinch. "Ma'am, is there any history of violence or maybe some kind of dark act being performed in this room?" he asked, his voice rising in pitch. I didn't answer, keeping a safe distance from the walls. Mark was beginning to get sense of how haunted this place was. If he didn't, I wouldn't have considered him to be a medium at all. I had called him to help me with the spirits that were kept within the house. The last few nights I had heard them howling and screaming, begging to be released. Sometimes they would shake the whole structures as they tried to scare me into opening the door and letting them free. Mark had come highly recommended as a medium who could release lost and tortured souls. Jokingly referred himself as an exterminator when I called. The joke wore out pretty quickly in the face of the actual danger this house held. He was now sweating, nervously trying to get a read on whatever was down here with us. I think that something is seriously wrong here." His voice quivered while his fingertips ran the length of the wall. "What do you mean?" I whispered. He was shaking, barely able to keep his balance now. He looked at me with terror in his eyes. The howling had started. Ghostly voices began calling out to us, some screaming like they were being ripped apart. Mark stumbled, falling to the dusty floor. "Are you alright?" I moved towards him, ready to bring him back to his feet. He scrambled to get away from me. "What did you do to me?" His words were slurred, his breathing erratic. I finally let the smile I had been holding back creep across my face. "Ah, you are all the same, you psychic show-offs." I cackled, grabbing him by the collar. I pulled him off the ground and gazed at his eyes. They were barely open. The drugs I had put in his water had taken their full effect, rendering him immobile. I knew he could still hear me though. "Mark, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I can hear the spirits too. I could hear them loud and clear," I yelled as I shook him, his eyes catching a brief glimpse of me before rolling back again. I dragged him over the center of the room, drawing a circle around him. The spirits were in uproar, begging, waiting. I always like to work them into a frenzy before I let them have their taste. It's all a part of putting on a good show. I pulled a dagger out from the holster around my waist, savoring the scream and the wailing coming from all around me. Faces shone through the wall, warping the concrete momentarily as they pushed their way towards their meal. Finally, I sank the blood into Mark's throat, releasing them from their bondage. A couple dozen tortured souls burst through the walls, swarming Mark's body. They lapped the blood from his neck, from the floor, tearing his limbs off to let more flow, greedily consuming all they could obtain. I sighed happily, watching my beloved pets doing what they loved best. As they finally drained Mark's body of his fluids, they flew past me, swooping down and giving me goosebumps as they returned to the walls, full and content. Mark had been a large meal for them. The more spiritual the victim, the more satisfied they were. They would stay quiet for a long while now. I made my way back upstairs, placing the amulet around my neck and knowing the next time they were hungry, I would hear Mark's voice howling along with the rest. About a week ago, I downloaded Tinder. Let's see what the hype is about, right? After days of not using the app, I came back to a good amount of matches, like 20 or so. One caught my eye though. The girl had messaged me first. The others didn't. That's usually a good sign, right? It was a simple hey. Hi I sent back. A couple minutes later, she sends me her Snap contact card and says she's on there more than Tinder. I figured, what the heck? I add her and she accepts it. She snapped me first. I opened her Snap. She was a very cute girl, cuter than her Tinder pics. We had talked for hours the first day. Later that same night, we had talks about meeting up and what we should do. I recommend we go out to eat, but she said that's boring. I've been on plenty of dinner dates. How about a hike? To be honest, I'm not the fittest guy, and a hike didn't really fit into my list of activities. But Simp Me, of course, said, yeah, that sounds fun. Where should we hike? She highly recommended David's Hill. It's a very popular attraction in our area, filled with park, and if you walk down the field is where the hike trail starts. She really insisted we go at 5 p.m., as many people aren't in the park. I felt a little uneasy about the time. I wanted to go earlier, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. We snapped more. I then got a feeling of, what am I doing? It's too soon to go on a date. We've only been talking for 2 days, and a hike with a total stranger didn't fit my narrative. I took longer to respond, hoping she would get the hint and leave me on red. But nope. She snapped me a couple of times when I didn't respond. Nothing creepy, just snaps of random things. I would reply with one word, seeming uninterested. It's a scummy thing to do, but I guess I wasn't about it. She later took the hint, as she left me on red for 5 hours. Then one day, I deleted her after that. She had matched with me on Tinder, but later that week, I was scrolling through Facebook to see a news article about the same girl. This is sad. Apparently she was kidnapped from a different state. She doesn't even live where I live. And as for the 2 guys, well, they were involved in human trafficking. She was found and rescued after a failed attempt to lure another woman. These were their tricks. I just imagined how I could have easily been kidnapped or worse. I've since deleted the app, and for anyone reading or hearing this, please be careful.
Are we there yet? The words every father expects to hear. Invariably at every 10-minute interval, my 8-year-old daughter Cynthia would peel her face from the car window and ask the same question. And dutifully I would respond, "Almost, sweetie." We had been driving for almost 2 hours, which should give you an idea of how much I'd had to put up with, to drop Cynthia off at her mother's. Lisa and I had been divorced for about 3 years, and doggedly she still demanded to see Cynthia for a month every Christmas. Now, Lisa wasn't exactly Mother of the Year material, but hell, I'm no angel myself. I'm 37, I smoke, and have a nasty penchant for cursing like a sailor. But damn it, I love Cynthia, and it still kills me every time I drop her off for that dreaded month of December. Needless to say, I was in no hurry to get to Lisa's, so this year I decided to take an old backwoods route. I figured it would be a good chance to show Cynthia the beauty of nature while squeezing out a little bit more time with her before I had to leave her for 4.5 weeks. She was so engrossed by the passing scenery that she would only ask the periodic, "Daddy, what's that?" or "Are we there yet?" before replacing her round little face on the passenger side window. And I would indulge her every question, explaining, "It's an old grain silo, sweetheart," or "Almost, dear." After a while, I flicked on the radio for some quiet background noise and began to slip into the quiet meditative trance induced by long-distance driving. However, my calm was soon disturbed by a shriek from Cynthia. Slamming on the brakes instinctively, I brought the car to a lurching halt, looking over at Cynthia. "What is it, Cynthia? What's wrong?" I asked, panicking. My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. Heart attack, pulmonary edema, kidney failure, all of which were outlandish, seeing as Cynthia was perfectly healthy. But Cynthia just kept staring out the window, transfixed by whatever was out there. As I looked past her small childlike head, I began to see what had elicited the shrill scream. It was an enormous white birch tree in the middle of a snowy field. Now, aside from the unusually large size of the tree, birches don't usually grow much bigger than a foot in diameter. This one had to be at least 4 or 5. Something else struck me as odd about the leaves of the tree. It was a good distance into the field, about 30 yards, and I was still looking from behind Cynthia's head, which was firmly plastered to the window at this point, but I could just barely make out the shape of the leaves themselves. It didn't even register at first, but after looking carefully, I realized that the leaves of the tree weren't leaves at all. They were shoes, hundreds of them, hanging from the branches by the laces, every shape and size imaginable. I slowly opened the door and stepped out to get a closer look. The sheer size of the tree was impressive, and the spread of its branches was unbelievable. By a rough sizing up, I guessed there to be about 600 or 700 pairs hanging all in all, some from even the smallest branches. I began to walk around the front of the car, unable to take my eyes off the bizarre spectacle before me. Then, without warning, I heard the other door open, and Cynthia shot off toward the tree, giggling with childish laughter. Now, aside from the fact that this was a field in the middle of nowhere, it was also the dead of winter. So as Cynthia ran off toward the tree, wearing just a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, my first reaction was to go get her coat. Lord knows she wouldn't put it on even if it was 50 below. I turned around to grab her snow jacket from the car, and when I turned back, coat in hand, to yell at Cynthia to wear it, she was gone. My eyes searched the snow frantically for her, tracing her footsteps directly to the tree's base. "Cynthia," I called. I heard a girlish giggle in response. "Cynthia, we don't have time to play games." I took a step towards the tree, and as the snow crunched underfoot, I heard her giggle again, unmistakable. "Cynthia, come here right this instant," I shouted, my voice becoming slightly more hoarse. To my immense relief, she revealed herself, dashing out from behind the shoe tree. But there was something off about her, something I couldn't quite put my... She was barefoot. "Fine, Daddy, I'm here. Do we have to go? The tree is so warm and nice." I grabbed her by the shoulder, shaking her small frame, nearly trembling from fear. "Cynthia, where are your shoes?" Nervously, she answered. "The nice man told me to take them off, Daddy. Look, he gave me a pretty necklace." My heart sank to the pit of my stomach. Sure enough, there, around my daughter's neck, was a small heart-shaped pendant. I clenched my jaw, grabbed the pendant, and snapped it off. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Cynthia, I need you to get back in the car and stay there. Now." "But Daddy, my Now, Cynthia. Get in the car and lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone until I tell you so, okay?" "Okay. If you say so." Cynthia walked off nervously toward the car, throwing glances back at me over her shoulder. I watched every step she took until she finally got in and locked the doors. Then I turned to confront this nice man. Whatever sick fuck set up this little sideshow attraction, I wasn't about to allow him to go around luring little kids in with cheap baubles just so he could get his rocks off. I followed Cynthia's track straight toward the tree until it loomed before me larger than life. It was then that I noticed something about the shoes. They were all children's, not a single pair larger than a kid's size. 7. I shuddered and placed my hand on the tree for support. To my shock, it was warm to the touch. I peeled back some of the papery bark to get a closer look at what might be causing this phenomenon, and was surprised to see what looked like initials carved in. Now that wouldn't have been terribly unusual, were it not for the fact that right next to those initials were more, and next to those, even more. As I peeled back more and more of the thin, waxy bark, I discovered dozens of initials carved in, then hundreds. I took a step back. I began to get an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, the twisting, wrenching knot that forms when you know something's wrong. I glanced back at the shoes, and the knot tightened. I saw Cynthia's sneakers dangling there, like tiny little cadavers, dangling languidly by their laced entrails. Thoroughly creeped the fuck out at this point, I turned and ran the fuck back to the car, my breath forming heavy clouds in the sharp, cold air. I grabbed my key, unlocked the driver's side door, got in, and locked it behind me. I turned to Cynthia and asked her, "Are you okay, sweetie? Did anyone hurt you or touch you?" "No, Daddy. I'm fine. Mr. Smiles is funny. He makes me laugh. He's got a funny face." That knot in my stomach twisted and squeezed, sending icy tendrils of fear creeping up toward my heart. "Who's Mr. Smiles, Cynthia?" Cynthia remained wordless as her eyes slid to the back seat. My heart froze solid as I slowly turned my gaze to follow hers. It lounged casually back there, only barely human. Bony talons, clasped neatly together, protruded from underneath the rotting flesh of its fingers. Its funny face was a mass of decaying skin, stretched tight over its bleached white skull. The corners of its mouth had sloughed away, leaving only a sickening grimace permanently etched beneath its eyeless sockets. The grotesque smile widened, and it reached into a jar at its side, grasping a tiny piece of candy between its decrepit fingers. Care for a piece of candy? I stared, frozen with terror, as Cynthia's hand reached out and snatched the candy from its clutches and began unwrapping it. The creature's eyeless gaze seemed to shift to meet my own horrified stare, its disgusting grin widening ever so slightly. I tried to scream, but curiously found that I couldn't. Funny, I hadn't even noticed his other hand creeping up my neck. A creeping chill entered my veins as his icy talons clutched my throat. Warm blood spilled down my chest as my last breaths wheezed through the fleshly torn hole in my neck. Cynthia looked at me curiously, suckling innocently on that piece of candy. Her voice echoed around me as I spiraled down into darkness. Daddy, what's wrong? Daddy? Daddy?